My job was the arbiter of risk. Whether or not you came up from a technical perspective or a business perspective, both aspects are ever-changing and ever-dynamic. You can't eliminate risk. You can't eliminate it physically, you can't eliminate it logically. What you can do is minimize it, and a lot of organizations have swept things under the rug because it was inconvenient to go deal with it.
Hey, it's Anthony Free with Halcyon again. I've got my old friend Malcolm Harkins here, my first chief security and trust officer in the business here.
I was a former finance person. I was a profit and loss manager in a billion-dollar business unit until before I tripped my way into security in late 2001. You know what my design goal was? No material or significant event. And the problem we've got with cybersecurity is we have all these faux measures.
Are we getting to a point that the right people are going to stop wanting to be CISOs?
I think it's the wrong people will stop wanting to be CISOs. The right people will still continue to be CISOs because they have the integrity in the background to do the job.
Hey, it's Anthony Free with Halcyon again, and welcome back. I've got my old friend Malcolm Harkins here, my first chief security and trust officer in the business here. Malcolm, how have you been?
I've been doing good. It's been an interesting year so far.
Yeah, to say the least, right? There's a lot of things happening. You know, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was, that changing role for security executives. And I'd like to say, at a point here, after a major cyber attack, everybody went home except for the PagerDuty folks, right? But now we're starting to see that liability start to go up the food chain a little bit. We're starting to see some legislative things that are going to change that landscape quite a bit. We're seeing some legal liability kind of approaching that C-level. How are you seeing these roles change and the responsibilities and the liability there?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, for me, the context of my perspective on this, I think, is different than a lot of peers in the industry.
Expecting that.
But that's partly because of my background. And you know this, and a lot of people in the industry know this. I was a former finance person. I was a profit and loss manager in a billion-dollar business unit until before I tripped my way into security in late 2001. Now, for me, growing up as a finance person, the responsibility I had was to have a level of objectivity and integrity for financial reporting and financial forecasting, which meant the actuals were the actuals. And a lot of people say there's GAAP and there's stuff like that, but there's still wiggle room and interpretation that you can do on actuals. But I was responsible for making sure those things had integrity and were done in a timely manner. And then for financial forecasting, again, it's a forecast, which means you're predicting. It's a portrait of what you think might be occurring out in the future. Those also have to have a level of integrity. They have to have data and logic to support it. I've always approached my role with that perspective starting in late 2001, because there's a portrait of risk that's an actual. What occurred, what went bump, and what is the likely, and I'll use the word materiality, implication of it. And then when you're thinking about characterizing risk going forward, again, it's like a financial forecast. There's a lot of arguments around it, but my job was the arbiter of risk. Have the integrity in the actuals and integrity and objectivity in the forecast. And so since I always took it that way, for me, everybody getting all wrapped around the axle around what is materiality and we're all liable and stuff like that, I'm like, look, if your portrait of risk is just people's opinions, well, frankly, get the fuck off, get out of the way. It should be data-driven and logic-driven. And I think that is...
But is it a true kind of one-to-one? How close does it get? Because when you're talking about financials, of course, there's unexpected things that happen. Markets move, natural disasters, you name it, right? There's not quite is that the same as having an adversary who's actively trying to...
Not exactly, but an adversary is an externality that has an effect on your systems, your data, and stuff like that. And obviously, it's intentional. In the macro setting, exchange rates, labor markets, natural disaster, those things are externalities that the CEO, CFO, business unit general manager, in some cases, has an ability to understand, sometimes forecast, but sometimes it comes completely out of the blue. And so but they still have to have a level of integrity in how they're looking at it. And I think the thing that's happened over a period of time, it's happened to me a number of times in different roles, where you end up in difference of a perspective with CIO, CTO, business unit general manager, and they're like, Malcolm, I think you're characterizing this critical risk thing. It's too great. It's moderate at best. We can kick the can down the road. I'd say, why? Simple question. Well, because I think so. Well, I've got data and logic to back up my perspective that this is critical risk. And if all you have is an opinion, I'm sorry, I'm the arbiter of risk for these things. And so I think what has caused this cascading set of liabilities and pressures and the regulatory stuff, and you've heard me say this years ago, is there's economics of insecurity, and a lot of organizations have kicked the can down the road or swept things under the rug because it was inconvenient to go deal with it. And CISOs that went along with that and changed their perspective on risk without supporting data or logic, or on the one hand, they may have had data on the inside saying this is a big issue, and then reported to the board it wasn't an issue, and then did something else when they answered a third-party risk report, and that inconsistency causes an integrity issue, and that causes the jeopardy problem.
Saying it's not an issue the same as accepting the risk? No, but I want to hear
But yeah, but no different. So ignore cyber for a moment. Let's say I have a sole source factory in an earthquake zone, and it's responsible for 25% of the revenue and 10% of the net profits. If it's in an earthquake zone and it's a sole source factory and it has that level of potential materiality impact to the business, it goes in your 10K so that your investors can make a decision as to whether or not the circumstances around that causes an investment risk for them. Now, in my mind, it's no different than in the cyberspace. So I'll give you some dialogues from my current role within Layer, where I've had dialogues with peers that are in public companies that have artificial intelligence that they are using, and they've already publicly discussed it, that the artificial intelligence is critical to the future and is creating material benefit for the organization and thus the shareholders.
Sure.
Okay. Well, if you are not adequately doing operational security to protect the models, then that's no different than a sole source factory that can be taken out because of an earthquake, and you need to disclose it. So I go, where's that in your 10K that you have explained to your shareholders that you have a technology that is not protected, that if is attacked will create a material impact? I was like,
it's just it. Is cyber more nascent than something like an earthquake zone?
It's harder on the one hand, but I don't think it's that hard. And a lot of people have complained about there's a lack of definition of materiality by nature. Why? Because the context of your organization is different than the next person. Me being at a startup, 250 grand is material. I'm at an Intel or somebody that has billions of dollars in the bank. Well, materiality for cash in the bank might be more in the tens of millions of dollars. So, which is where that whole aspect of the SEC and materiality and Sarbanes-Oxley has always been to allow companies to evaluate it, make their decisions, and then report accordingly, given the context of their business. So that way it's not overly prescriptive, other than you document it, you understand it, and you report under certain circumstances. And even the 4-day rule. 4-day rule's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
Right? I wrote a paper well over a year and some ago around materiality matters. Intel was the first public company in 2010 to disclose a cybersecurity incident. In 2010. under existing Sarbanes-Oxley law.
Way before the SEC.
Way before they did that. And you go, why did they have to do that? Well, we kept having all these incidents, all these occurrences, people paying ransomware. They provided guidance 2011 or 2012, again in 2018. And guess what? People were not properly informing their investors. So they finally said, enough is enough. We're going to really clarify this with a fine point.
Now, that materiality decision, though, happens at a C level, at the board level.
Sometimes. My view of it is it's a combination of, obviously, management, heavy on the financial side, but the one thing that I always looked at it is you almost need, an SEC legal perspective, not only from the internal financial team, but the folks who do financial reporting. But in the case of what Intel did, I woke up in the middle of the night during an incident a couple weeks in when we started learning enough, and I'm like, boy, this could be materially significant under Sarbanes-Oxley. I go talk to the general counsel early in the morning in the corporate headquarters. He was aware of the investigation along with a handful of others, and he's like, you might be right. Go talk to the head of SEC Legal. I read him on the investigation. He says, you might be right. We go get outside counsel. As we were working through the rest of the investigation, we kicked off that materiality and the need to disclose or not to disclose. And then through the internal review process and with outside counsel, it came back and said, we should likely disclose this. And so we put it in our 10K when we were doing our financial filings. We didn't decide to do the 4-day rule under the 8K, but we were splitting hairs at that point because there was no precedent. And we're like, well, we know we need to report, but it didn't appear that we really needed to do it in the 4-day rule. So we did it in our 10K.
But this sounds like that there was already a lot of groundwork laid at Intel to have this kind of a culture where this is going to happen. Some of what I worry about with some of this regulatory pressure and the re-victimizing of the victims is that there's going to, all this progress we've made in the last, say, 15 years of getting a voice, at the board level for cyber, now that's going to start getting suppressed a little bit more, right? It's like, we don't want to hear about it unless we really have to hear about it, right? Because now we've got this SEC rules on top of,
it's
socks.
There's some, I won't say that's not a valid argument, and I think in some corporate cultures, unfortunately, that's true, but I would say that already exists. Roll back the clock 4+ years ago, I facilitated a dialogue for the RSA conference. We did it online because of COVID, and it was all around integrity matters. And I had some friends and peers, and I also did a survey of over 100 security executives. 76% of us had indicated that we've either been asked to or watered down the portrait of risk to the board, which means the pressure to dilute or mischaracterize actual cyber risk has already been occurring.
Yeah.
So to me, I go, people were already doing that. This, if I look at it differently and roll back the clock 60+ years, CFO, right? CFO was a back office accountant. They had some stuff, but the CEO and others basically ruled the roost. But over time, because of, in some cases, corporate America and stuff like that, we had mischaracterizations of the state of people's financials. We had Enron, WorldCom, hence Sarbanes-Oxley, and the executives and the board needing to attest to their state of internal controls around the fact that in a material sense, there's nothing that could be found that indicates that what we're reporting is inaccurate. And to me, I've long believed we needed a Sarbanes-Oxley equivalent for cyber. I think the CEO, the CFO, the general counsel, the CISO, the CIO, and the CTO all need to attest to the state of their internal controls, that to the best of their ability, they have controls in place to mitigate a material or significant event. And the reason why I believe that, day one when I got the job running security and business continuity at Intel, didn't know crap about security. Andy Grove still running the company. My first thought as a former finance person, what do they need from me? They need me to manage and mitigate material impact to the business. That's what the board and the shareholders care about. You know what my design goal was? No material or significant event. Was the design goal. When I got silenced, that was the design goal.
Yeah.
No material significant event. Everything else should be flowing to give yourself assurance of that. And the problem we've got with cybersecurity is we have all these faux measures, and I'll overstate it that they're faux measures, but we've got a maturity score of 3.5. What does that mean? How hard is it going to be for an adversary to get in under a score of 3.5 on maturity? Nobody knows.
Yeah.
Right? And to me, I think you could look at it and say, hey, our goal, and some people might go, well, we're okay with 2 material events a year. Okay, great. Be transparent then on that with your investors and your shareholders and your customers. But I think there's ways in which you can architect your goals, architect your controls so that you can tell your shareholders for your operations, and then tell your customers, particularly if you're creating technology, what you're trying to achieve. And
how much does hindsight play into this, as well as at least the perception of events, of statements, of things? Because I cut my teeth in this business on the Heartland breach, back 2010.
Yep.
About and unwittingly got sucked into a class action lawsuit just because of some of the articles that I was writing. The investors, of course. So here's Heartland. I think they got a QSA every quarter.
Yep.
Right. Passed every one of them, and then the breach was discovered. They'd been in there for a year and a half, and PCI DSS famously said at the time, well, you're compliant until you're not, right?
Yeah, well, or, but again, those compliance measures are a set of controls meant to say that you've got a decent operating environment to manage and mitigate risk. That doesn't mean an attacker can't finagle their way through to things. You can't eliminate risk. Can't eliminate it physically, you can't eliminate it logically. But what you can do is minimize it. And then for what you can't minimize, again, I think if you transparently report it, particularly if it could cause a material impact to folks, you shouldn't get in trouble. It doesn't mean you're not going to get sued,
Sure.
but you're going to be able to say, here's the data and logic we have that made this decision. Well, the world is changing all the
time. Things become material with the benefit of hindsight. Right?
Absolutely. But at the same time, if you understand your balance sheet, you understand your business processes, you should be able to understand what could cause material impact. I mean, your company, if it's a public company, already has risk statements. They have insurance coverages. And if you don't know what type of data, what type of system could then trigger a knock-on effect that causes an impact to something you've already defined as material, then I go, what were you doing as the CISO if you didn't understand material risk to the business? Were you just managing controls for control's sake? Right? That's the thing that has always driven me nuts, and particularly as the SEC thing, and people are like, well, we don't know what it is. I'm like, how do you not know what's going to cause material impact to your business? What have you been doing?
Since the 4-day rule came into effect last December, I think there's been some analysis of the reporting that has been done, and basically that nobody's really, been able to adhere to the reporting.
Well, there's been a lot of CYA.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we might get sued. We're going to say something and disclose it. And that's not helpful. There's a couple forms in the 8K. I can't remember. I think it's Form 8 or something like that, or Section 8, that if it's generalized and you're unsure, you can do that one. The form for cyber is only meant for when you've made the decision it is material. And so like I said, it's
But understanding the impact of that material event could take weeks, months.
well, exactly, because the clock starts, the 4-day rule starts when you've made the determination that the incident was material. Then you got 4 days to report it. But, and again, just using the Intel example from 14 and a half years ago, it took a couple weeks. It took a couple weeks into the investigation for me to realize, okay, crap. But I also had the financial acumen. I had also run and still ran all the systems for Sarbanes-Oxley. And so I understood those things. That's what triggered in my mind to go then have the conversations. And then while we were progressing the technical investigation, we were doing that type of materiality and legal analysis to make an appropriate decision or disclose or not. Now, if we made a decision not to disclose, and that was supported by our internal conclusion as well as outside counsel, I would have been comfortable with it. But if internally somebody, CEO, CFO, said that's not material, why?
Yeah.
Well, because I think so. Well, I'm sorry, that's not an analysis by a professional who's meant to interpret the SEC law and then give us guidance. And when we did that, all the experts in that area said it is appropriate for you to disclose, and we did.
Okay, so let's say at that point, then there's also a little bit of leeway and then how that is communicated, right?
Yeah.
So, for better or worse.
For better or worse.
Sometimes, in an effort to be transparent, there's a company like Okta tried to be as transparent as they could. The CEO was out there almost every day making statements, and they kind of buried themselves at,
it's
trying to do the right thing.
Trying to do the right thing can end up with the boomerang that knocks you on the back of the head. Yeah. At the same time, I'd rather take the path of trying to do the right thing, being transparent enough with customers, with shareholders. And I think if you do that, yeah, you might get sued. But I think at the end of the day, you'll end up having your integrity intact. Your customers who trusted you before will recognize that they need to continue to trust you because you dealt with them in a fair and honest way. I mean, we were at Silence. We had things that went bump. Mm-hmm. And when we had things that went bump that were potentially customer impacting, guess what? I picked up the phone and I'd call a customer. We'd have a dialogue on it, right? And some of them were like, you didn't need to tell me that. I'm like, yeah, I know. And guess what? They appreciated the trust, and then they stayed with us because they knew that they could trust the integrity of what we would do to protect our enterprise and protect them.
Now, as we were talking about liability kind of moving up the food chain, we have seen for the first time in this last 2 years, 2 CISOs actually be named in criminal actions. Looks like neither of them,
one obviously convicted, one, some aspects of it, I think have been dismissed.
Dismissed, yeah, large amounts of it have been dismissed and stuff. Are we getting to a point that, people are going to stop, the right people are going to stop wanting to be CISOs?
I think it's the wrong people will stop wanting to be CISOs. The right people will still continue to be CISOs because they have the integrity in the background to do the job.
Okay, and then what about as a seasoned CISO, your advice to those who are thinking, that's kind of the end game of my career path where I want to go, but now I'm kind of feeling like, I don't know, I don't want to be a scapegoat. I don't want to be the one who's paid to go under the bus.
It could dissuade some people for doing the role, but at the end of the day, I think it will better codify the role. Again, if you look historically at CFOs, their role really rose to prominence as the financial integrity and financial reporting and the liability occurred, right? And so I look at it as we should be embracing this and utilizing it to cement the role as it should be. One where again, in consultation with others, you have the responsibility to be the arbiter of risk, both in actuals and in forecast. And to me, it's almost no different than the CFO evolution over the years. And you look at that rise from the back office accountant into the role many CFOs play in terms of strategy, decision making, and that type of stuff. And a lot of that was because of the increased scrutiny on financial integrity.
So you see this as a potentially very positive kind of trends for the CISO, not something that's going to end up getting more and more named in regulatory and legal actions.
Well, both will occur, but the CISO will need to become more of a broadened executive. They can't just be a security wonk. They have to understand the business strategy, the marketing strategy. Again, they have to understand what causes the business to run and the disruptions to business processes and labor markets and all that other stuff, because guess what? Cyber-related incidents affect those things. And so I think part of the challenge we've got, and we've been talking about this for years around CISOs needing to have more business acumen and stuff like that. I think if you struggle in having the right dialogue with the others on the C-suite and the board, you don't have the breadth of acumen that they're looking for in that executive role.
Let's flip that a little bit to the more business-oriented CISOs who don't necessarily have the technical acumen, but they have those skill sets that you're talking about. How do they need to look at these trends and change their game?
Well, I mean, that's basically me, right?
Yeah.
If you look at my background, regardless of whether or not you came up from a technical perspective or a business perspective, both aspects are ever-changing and ever-dynamic, because technology is changing business and markets and processes and innovation cycles and stuff like that, which is also generating risk. So you have to grow on both fronts all the time. Otherwise, you're not going to be doing it. I mean, you couldn't stay still technically and still be accurate. Can't stay still in kind of the business markets and trends that are occurring and stay successful. And so for me, the ideal one is, if you're lacking on technical acumen, get enough of an understanding on it, but then surround yourself with people who have that depth that you might be lacking. If you're a technologist and that's more natural to you, you've got to grow enough on that business side, but then you got to surround yourself with people that have more of a depth and breadth of the business acumen to round you out. And that becomes, again, the organizational construct. Like anything, where I'm weak, I need people that are strong around me, right? Because we all can't have all the skills. I mean, there's a few rare people in the world who are brilliant technologists, brilliant business people, understand markets, all that stuff, but that's rare. And, for me, I think it just becomes how do you constantly grow on all of those dimensions? And then where you're weak, focus your learning, and then shore yourself up with experts that you can rely on.
And for the C-suite and the board, how should they interpret these trends and their responsibility in finding the right CISOs for their organization? Because not every CISO is the right CISO for every organization, right? Based on those skill sets.
Not only the skill sets, but their behaviors and approach. I am not an ideal fit for a lot of organizations, because to me, risk management's a contact sport. I play it like hockey. I check people into the glass. I try not to use my stick in an unsportsmanlike way. Sometimes it happens, and sometimes I've been put in the penalty box. But I am assertive, borderline aggressive on that stuff. And that does not work in some corporate cultures, right? So you have to look at not only the skills on the technical and the business side, but also the behavioral tendencies of the individual, coupled with that organizational cultural dynamic, because all of them play. I would alienate too many people in some organizations just because the way in which my disposition is. That would not be healthy for an organization managing risk. And other ones that have a assertive, borderline aggressive, kind of tumultuous culture where you clash a lot and then you lock in on things and you execute, good skill set, right? So you have to, I think, look at all of those things when you're evaluating it. But again, I'd go back to a fundamental question. I would ask, if I was interviewing somebody for my type of role, I would ask them, what's the design goals you're trying to achieve with security? Simple question. And if they say, I want to be PCI compliant, I want to be SOC 2 compliant, I'm like, okay, great. You've given me a set of compliance goals. I'm asking you, what's the design goal? What is the equivalent of the rating for the safe that I bought, and how long will the contents last at 1200 degrees Fahrenheit?
Yeah.
Right? Now, if I was a CISO being interviewed, that would be a dialogue I'd have with the CEO and the board and say, what's your design goal for the cybersecurity program? And if they just give me a bunch of compliance stuff, I'd go, okay, great. But what level of material risk are we willing to have unmanaged? And if they say, well, we don't want any material risk, I was like, okay, then the design goal is no material significant event, recognizing you can't eliminate the possibility, but that's what we're striving for. Mm-hmm. And if they say yes, then you go, great. And then you build everything around that. And then if you need budget, and they go, well, you can't have the budget. Okay, well, then we've got these 5 things that we know because of pen testing, attack path mapping, control deficiencies will lead with a high probability to a material event. So either change the design goal or give me the budget to manage and mitigate these to hit the design goal.
Very good. Takes both.
It does.
Very good. Malcolm, always a pleasure talking with you. I learn something every time.
Thanks, Anthony.
And good luck over at Head and Layer.
Thanks.
I'm watching guys really close.
Yeah, it's fun. It's exciting, and it's certainly a risky area, not only for what people have been doing, but what they might be doing. But at the same time, and you've heard me say this before, risk surrounds and envelops us. Without understanding it, we risk everything. Without capitalizing on it, we gain nothing. So we have to go take these risky bets, but we have to manage and mitigate them while we're doing it.
Sound sage advice as always. Thank you, Malcolm.
Thanks.